Pregnant sister and mom took over my apartment just weeks after I lost my fiancée. Now they blame me for losing out grandpa's money, using a throwaway. This is about my super entitled mother and pregnant younger sister and how they are blaming me for something that I really don't think is my fault, but everyone else in my family is hating on me since they think that I'm being selfish. I am 25, male, and my sister is 22 and 6 months pregnant. We were raised by our single mother since our biological father passed away when I was 14 years old. Life was tolerable when he was alive because both my sister and I had parents to have our backs, like my sister had my mother and I had my dad. My mom had a very clear favorite and it was my sister, and I wouldn't say that I was my dad's favorite, but he could clearly see that my mom always favored my sister over me and he would try to balance it out by defending me. After he passed away, I had my grandparents, but it was not the same because they did not live with us. My dad's parents had passed away when he was really young and we were not particularly close to anybody from his family. My mom's parents often visited us, and sometimes, I would even spend the weekend and stuff with them, but we weren't living together. My mom had made it very clear to her parents that she wanted to live on her own with her kids and it was fine with her for them to visit occasionally, but she didn't want to live with them together as a family. I guess it has something to do with the fact that she wanted to be independent and free, although I don't really know how exactly you can call yourself independent when you're still relying on your parents for money. My dad was a vet and he made a decent income, so my mother never bothered to work after she got married and had us. However, after his passing, she took up a job in sales that my grandpa got her into through his connections. I thought that she was able to afford to raise us all on her own for a really long time, but it was just recently that I found out that my grandpa had been funding her all along. I don't know how she found the audacity to tell them that she didn't want them living with her under the same roof while still taking money from them shamelessly. Anyway, I guess you can tell that my mother didn't exactly treat me well after my father passed away, and I always felt supremely emotionally neglected and isolated, but I was not allowed to leave either. I could have just moved in with my grandparents and stayed with them, but my mom would never have entertained that idea. We would often fight when I would call her out on her behavior because all her affection was reserved for my sister, and not for me, but even during the fights, whenever I would tell her that I was going to move in with my grandparents, she would start emotionally manipulating me, and I was really young, so I ended up falling for it and always stayed back. It was really difficult because not only was my mother biased towards my sister, but my sister herself was also quite a brat and always tried to take advantage of it. Anything that happened, I would end up getting thrown under the bus and she would get away with whatever she did. We were treated incredibly differently, and that's why I guess she turned out to be a very different person from me as well. I was quite relieved when I started working at my first job after I graduated from college, because that would mean that I would get my own money and then, I wouldn't have to live with my mom anymore. As soon as I had saved enough money, I was out of there. Since then, I've been away from my family and it's been great. And for the past 2 years, I had been living with my fiancée, Maria. She and I met in college, started dating, and we started living together 2 years back. She was pretty much the love of my life and we got engaged about 3 weeks ago, but unfortunately, I lost her just a couple of days after our engagement. She passed away due to a freak accident at work, which I don't want to get into, but it was just really sad and unexpected and I still haven't been able to get over it. I don't think I'll ever be able to move on because I'm certain that she was my soulmate and I lost her as soon as we decided that we were going to spend the rest of our lives together. It's been very tough for me personally. My mom had been very considerate of me and was checking up on me every day after the funeral, which I thought was really nice. I didn't realize that she was just building up for a huge ask. 1 week ago, she visited me and started making some small talk to check up on me, and then, she got to the point and told me that since Maria was gone now, she wanted to ask me if I would be willing to let my pregnant sister move into my apartment. My sister isn't married, she got pregnant with her boyfriend, and so far, her boyfriend has been living separately with his parents, and she has been living in our house with our mother. But now, since they were getting closer to the birth of their baby, they wanted to start living together because it would be more convenient. However, she did not want to go out looking for apartments because she already had a place in mind, and it was my apartment since it was just the perfect distance from her boyfriend's workplace and I live in a nice neighborhood, but the rent is still not unaffordable. It's a steal deal, if I'm being honest, and I understand why she wants this apartment. She had been eyeing it ever since she and her boyfriend had a talk and decided that they wanted to move in together and had been planning on speaking to me about it. But then, Maria passed away, and she didn't know if it was the right time to talk to me or not. However, it had recently just occurred to my mother and her that since Maria was now gone, I had a lot of space in the apartment, and if I wanted to, I could stay there until I found a new place, but they really wanted to move in as soon as possible. The way my mother put it, it was just taken for granted that I was going to say yes and accept their offer to let them have the apartment. And she made it sound like they were doing me a favor by allowing me to stay in my own apartment while I was grieving, instead of sending me out to look for new places to move into. It was bad enough that they hadn't even bothered to come speak to me about it themselves, but had sent my mother to do their dirty work. It was even worse that they had decided that they were going to make it seem like it was a valid proposition because I had a lot of space in my apartment as my fiancée had passed away. It was wild and insensitive, and I can't imagine anybody who is in their right mind saying things like this. I was shocked when my mom started talking to me about it because I had honestly believed that she was looking out for me out of concern, but it was then that I realized she had only been checking up on me because she was building up to this. I was really angry, but I decided not to let it show. So very calmly, I had just asked her why exactly my sister and her boyfriend hadn't bothered to come speak to me herself. My mom told me that her reason was that she was exhausted and pregnant and didn't feel like having such a heavy discussion with me because she knew that it was not going to be easy for either of us to make this ask. When I asked my mother why had it been taken for granted that I was simply going to accept their offer, let them have the apartment, and not say anything, she had to think about it for a while, but then she told me that she and my sister had just figured that I would want to move out soon enough since this place is where I used to live with Maria, and it would probably have a lot of memories associated with that time, which would be hard for me while I was mourning her. I could tell that my mother had just come up with that explanation on the spot, and the real reason they had assumed that I would say yes was simply because they were just that entitled. Anyway, after I got my answers, I kept my cool and I told my mom that I was not willing to take their offer and I was going to stay in this apartment because I liked this place. Surprisingly, she did not argue and just left after that. I made the mistake of thinking that my mom and my sister would let it go, but they did not, because the next day, both of them showed up instead of just my mother. They told me that they realized that I was still grieving my fiancé, but my sister really wanted to move in with her boyfriend and my apartment was just the perfect place. She herself told me that she had come all the way to talk to me, even though she was mentally and physically exhausted all the time, just because she wanted to move in here, and she told me that she didn't even want me to move out, she would be perfectly fine with sharing the apartment. Not even for a second did it occur to them that they were being incredibly insensitive, and they just kept talking about how desperate she was to live together with her boyfriend, to see how it would be to stay under the same roof because they intended on getting married after the baby came along, and so, they needed this apartment and my help. She also kept playing the pregnant card, which is funny because I literally just lost my fiancé and yet, that didn't seem to mean anything to them. I didn't even feel like fighting with them, so I just told my sister that she was welcome to come stay here with her boyfriend and I was going to give it up. Within a few days, I had spoken to the landlord and ended my lease, and moved out with all my stuff, so they could have the place to themselves. I didn't do it out of the kindness of my heart, I just did it because I knew that they would keep finding ways to bother me until I agreed, and I didn't want that. I could have taken measures against it, but I didn't have the energy for it, to be honest. And more importantly, I intended on ending the lease in a couple of weeks anyway because I planned on moving to a different state for work. After I had lost Maria, it didn't make sense for me to continue staying here, and I started applying for jobs outside of the state. I could have been vindictive and petty and not let her have the apartment after I ended my lease, but it didn't make sense to act that way, especially when I was going through so much myself. After I moved out, I had thought about staying in a hotel, but I had way too much stuff with me, so I decided to head over to my grandpa's place. My grandma passed away 3 years ago after being sick for a very long time, and since then, my grandpa has also been living on his own. He had sold his old house and bought a new one in the suburbs, which was a little distance away from the city, and it was just perfect for me. He also knew what I was going through, and unlike my mother, he had been checking up on me after Maria's passing without any ulterior motives. However, he didn't know about my mom and my sister and the way they talked me into giving up my apartment for my pregnant sister and her boyfriend. He only found out about it when I showed up at his store with all my stuff and I explained everything that happened. I genuinely and honestly did not have an intention of stirring up any drama, I was just casually sharing it with him because ultimately, it had been my decision to give up the apartment, and I had even explained that to him. I had told him about my intentions of moving away and that, until then, I planned on staying with him because I knew that he would be fine with it. Personally, I had found it really offensive that my mom and my sister were pushing me to give up the apartment to my sister just because she was pregnant, but I didn't think about retaliating in any way since it just didn't seem worth it. But he was just outraged because he couldn't believe that they could be so insensitive, since I had told him about the comment that they had made, about the apartment having a lot of space now since Maria was gone. I didn't expect him to do anything, mostly because I didn't think it was a big deal since I myself had given up the apartment of my own position, but my grandpa told me that it was a big deal since it just went to show just how insensitive they were when it came to other people and how they did not care about anybody apart from themselves. I guess, I just didn't get enough about it because, at this moment, nothing seems bigger to me than losing my fiancé. But my grandpa decided to take things into his own hands and teach them a lesson. He knew that I was not going to do anything about it, so he dealt with matters himself, and his way of doing it was to cut off all their funds. And that's how I found out that not only had my mother been counting on my grandfather for money in the past, when she had been raising us, but even now, she continued to take money from him to maintain her lifestyle because she couldn't afford it herself. After I told my grandfather everything regarding the situation with my mom and my sister, he told me that he was going to handle it, but I didn't ask him what that meant. I just assumed that he was going to talk to my mom, but then, I started receiving countless messages from my mom and my sister, calling me heartless and saying that I did this on purpose and stuff like that. So then I was supposed to ask my grandpa what he had done, and he told me that all he had done was block their cards. That's literally all that he had done, and of course, he had also sent them a message that he would not be sending the money anymore. I was very confused because I didn't even know that they had been taking money from him, and that's when I found out, finally, after so many years, that my mom hadn't spent a single penny on raising us, and it had all been my grandparents. All the money that she made from her work went into her life. Her makeup, her clothes, her hair, and her parties and her friends, and her vacations. We were raised entirely on the money that our grandparents contributed, and my father had left us some money before he passed away since he had been sick and knew that he was not going to make it, so he had written out a will. But my grandparents had decided that they were going to support us for as long as they could, and that the fund that my dad had left for us would remain untouched until we were 18, which was a good call by them because otherwise my mom probably would have wasted all that money on herself as well. My grandparents had both been surgeons back in the day before he retired, so he was quite well off and money was not an issue for him, which was lucky because even though I had been able to do something for myself and was independent enough, he still had to support my mom and my sister from their lives until now. In spite of all the terrible behavior, he had unconditionally helped them out financially because he wanted to be taken care of and couldn't abandon them. But now, he thought that he had done enough for them, and it was about time that they did something for themselves because it was only going to enable them more and make them more entitled and cruel. And I guess he was right because so far, that's the exact effect that it had had. So I really didn't feel bad that he had cut off the funds for my mom and my sister, because after everything that he had told me, how he had been supporting them for so long, and how my mother had led me to think that she had been spending money on raising me just so she could more easily manipulate me when I was younger, I thought it was well deserved, and I simply blocked their numbers and accounts so they wouldn't be able to contact me. They already had the apartment and now they had a chance at making something of their lives and being independent. But instead of taking that chance, they decided to make me the bad guy here and posted a bunch of stuff on social media and tagged the rest of the family to let them know that apparently, I had instigated my grandpa against them and had brainwashed and manipulated him into cutting them out of his life. It was all a bunch of lies. I had done nothing of the thought, and they knew it because my grandpa had made it very clear to them that I hadn't told them anything. This was something that he was doing for his own conscience. Anyway, that did not seem to matter to them, and they went off on social media about me. They set a narrative about me and started pushing it, and of course, my idiotic relative started to believe it. So now, everybody's messaging me to tell me that I'm being a horrible person by bothering a pregnant girl, and they think that if I didn't want them to have the apartment, I should have just said so, instead of letting them have it and then manipulating my grandpa against them to get back at them. I'm already coping with the loss of my fiancée. This is the last thing that I need, and I have been having a hard time dealing with all the hate from my family. But because of the overwhelming number of messages that I have been receiving, I just feel like I might have done something wrong, and that the best way to deal with this would be to apologize and to get my grandpa to start funding them again or something. The only snag that I'm hitting is that it just doesn't sound right, and neither does it feel right. But I've been having a hard time figuring out what I should do because of how messy the situation is for me right now. So Ida for sharing an incident with my grandpa, which made him cut off the funds that he had been providing my mom and my pregnant sister with. Update 1, alright, first of all, I just want to thank everyone who responded to my original post so much. Thank you for letting me know that I'm not the one at all, and I don't need to feel sorry, and thank you for offering condolences. It means the world to me. I would also like to explain certain things before I get into the rest of the update. So first of all, I did not give up the apartment because I was being a doormat, I just didn't want to fight with them. I think people need to realize that things are not always going to work as there should be other people, and right now, you guys need to understand that my brain is not functioning like it should be. If Maria had still been alive, I probably wouldn't have reacted that way, but I just felt like it was not worth it to fight with them, and I let them have the apartment. I could have been petty about it and ended the lease without putting them in touch with my landlord, but I didn't even have the energy or mental capacity to be doing stuff like that. I just wanted to get it over so that I wouldn't have to interact with them again, and I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from. Also, about my grandparents, I would just like to defend them for a bit and say that they were always there for me when we were kids, and it's not like they were bad people who were always on my mom's side. In fact, that was hardly ever the case. It's not like my grandparents didn't know how my mom would treat me or that they didn't try to fix it. They would always sympathize with me, tell me that I was free to live with them if I wanted to, and fight with my mom for my sake, but nothing ever changed. They knew that they couldn't fight for my custody because that would make the situation worse, and maybe they would end up not even being able to see me if they tried to do something like that. Besides, it wasn't guaranteed that they would end up getting my custody because I was only being emotionally and neglected, and there was no proof of it either. My mother was unwilling to let me go, and at the time, I used to believe that she was raising me with her own money and was working hard to do so, so I owed it to her to stay with her at the very least if that's what she wanted. And, yeah, I hope you guys understand that my grandparents tried their very best to be there for me. As for why my grandpa had been supporting my mother, financially, and even my sister, until recently, and had never told me about it, it's kind of complicated. My grandparents only had my mother, she did not have any other siblings. She had been spoiled rotten as a kid by my grandparents, which they take full responsibility for, but they had just figured that she would go out of it as she grew older. It did not happen and they tried every single way to fix that, but she just kept going back to her old entitled ways every time. Eventually, they just gave up and hoped that marriage and motherhood would make it better, but even then, it hardly helped. My dad was a bit of a positive influence, so she mellowed down for a bit, but after his passing, she was right back. My grandparents did not want to lose her because losing her would also mean losing access to us, their grandkids. They couldn't afford it when we were younger, and as we grew older and more independent, they still found it more and more difficult to cut my mother out of their lives and stop funding her and stuff. So they would fight about it constantly, but they just couldn't say no to her because of how attached they were to her. He admitted that he kind of had been a doormat, but it was his daughter that he was talking about and he didn't know how to explain it, but he just felt weak when it came to her. However, after what had happened recently with me, he decided that he couldn't enable this kind of behavior anymore. The reason he hadn't told me about how he had been funding my mom and my sister for so long was because he didn't want me to have a low opinion of him. So yeah, that was it. It was a much needed discussion that my grandpa and I just needed to get into, and now that we are done with it, we have decided that we don't really need to respond to the rest of the family. We don't owe them anything, not even a clarification. The few people who have bothered to reach out to me personally and ask me what's going on, I have responded to them and that's it. That's where I'm going to draw the line at. I'm not going to post any statement to defend myself, because I really am not interested. I just want to heal, want to live my life, and not be bogged down by these meaningless relationships with people who don't even care about me, they just want to gossip and act righteous. I had said in my original post that I wanted to move out of the state and work outside, and I have been contacted by a few companies, so I'm in the talk with them, and soon enough, I think I'll be leaving. I do intend on coming back occasionally, so I can visit my grandpa, Maria's parents, and a few friends, but for the most part, I'm done with this place. Update 2, hey, it has been 3 weeks since I last posted here, and I just wanted to let you guys know that I have been hired by one of the companies that reached out to me, and in a few weeks, I will be moving away. I have been staying with my grandpa and things have been good. The hype around that whole string of posts that my mom and my sister had put up has died down and nobody from the family has contacted me anymore. I guess the few people who knew the truth after talking to me personally have made sure that other people got to know me as well, because a lot of people have apologized and a lot of people haven't, but it doesn't matter to me. In a few weeks, I'll be gone, and here is where I would like to end it. I have heard from a couple of my friends and cousins that my sister has still been constantly bad-mouthing me for bothering her while she was pregnant and having no mercy, probably for attention, but she was put in her place by most of the people she had been trying to get attention from. They called her out on her hypocrisy, how she was trying to seek sympathy because she apparently wanted to make herself sound like the victim here, but she was the one who had been insensitive and heartless enough to approach me to ask to give up my apartment, especially knowing that I have been going through a lot of time after the loss of my fiancée. A lot of people have told me that they are on my side and they are not going to be speaking to my mom or my sister anymore, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that there are still nice and kind people who would stand up for the right thing, like them. And of course, also my grandpa. He has been telling me that it has been really difficult for him to know that he's probably not going to be able to speak to my mother for a really long time, but he knows that it has to be done, and he's being really brave about it. Now, I have to be brave too, and make my mark in a new city. I just really hope that Maria will be proud of me and how I'm dealing with all of this now. Update 3, hey, guys. Almost 3 months have passed since I moved away from home and have been working outside of my state. Initially, it was quite hard for me to deal with this, and I had second thoughts about what I was doing several times. I just wanted to go home to the comfort of everything that I knew, but I decided to power through since the company that had hired me was offering good pay. Also, I wanted to keep myself occupied with work, so I would be able to slowly heal from everything that happened. I stayed in touch with my friends and my grandpa and even Maria's parents, and occasionally, I would even go back to see them. I still do, and initially, I would find it very difficult to come back to work. But I always made my way back and decided to fight, and in short, I did not quit and I made it work. And now, I'm getting promoted to a higher position and I couldn't be happier. I obviously still really miss Maria a lot, I miss her every single day, and I think I definitely could be a lot happier if she was still with me. But I know that she's with me in spirit and she's looking after me in whichever way she can, and I'm really grateful for it. I know that she would be proud of me today, knowing that I'm doing everything in my power to make a better life for myself. I'm gonna live out all the dreams that we had dreamt together and make sure that I live my life to the fullest since she hadn't been able to. I'm gonna make her proud and yeah, just do my best in life. Thank you for checking up on me.